Hello and welcome to our webinar, Wilmac and Nectar, coming together to provide a future-proof digital experience platform. Thank you to everyone who is joining us today. It's currently 12 p.m. Eastern on April 6th, 2022, and we're really glad that you tuned in. I just have a few housekeeping notes to go over before we get started. All participants have been placed in listen-only mode with your microphone muted. This webinar is being recorded, so it will be available to watch on demand afterwards. We have some questions prepared for our audience so we get a better grasp of the position you're currently in. So by submitting your answer to those, we'll be able to tailor the presentation more toward your goals. So please answer those when they come up. Our chat and question windows are wide open, so feel free to enter any comments or questions that might arise throughout the webinar. I'll monitor both of those during it and bring them up throughout the presentation. And if we can't get to the question that you submit, we'll be sure to follow up with you individually. Finally, after you leave the webinar, a quick survey will pop up on your screen. Please leave us your honest feedback so we can continue to improve these webinars. So now that our housekeeping is all done, let's move on to our introductions of our presenters. Okay, so I'm Emily Miller. I'm the Director of Marketing at Wilmac. I'm based in our Rochester, New York office, and it is 50 degrees here today, so it is a good day, and I'll be moderating. So I will hand it over to Garry now.
Hi everyone, it's Garry White. I'm the Sales Director here at Wilmac. I'm based in Toronto. It is not 50 degrees up here, so there you go. Yeah, I've got 10 years plus experience in this industry with call recording and voice technology, and excited to be presenting at Nectar today. And Joe?
And good afternoon. My name is Joe Fuccillo. I am the Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of Nectar. I've been in this industry too long now, reveal my age, looking forward to talking to you today about some great topics.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe and Garry. So these are two really experienced individuals in what we're discussing, and they're really great representations of our two companies and the partnerships that we formed. So now I'll briefly review what we'll be discussing today. It won't be showing up on our screen, but I figured I'd cover it quickly. So I'm first going to let Garry and Joe talk about their respective organizations and explain how we mesh together to help customers like you. The core part of our presentation will be addressing 5 questions that spark a discussion on Nectar DXP and Wilmac Continuity Replay and how we can kind of work together to help you manage your CX, comply with regulations, and assure that your recording platforms are working correctly. Again, feel free to enter your comments and questions in the chat or question windows throughout the discussion. And I will now toss it over to Garry to talk about Wilmac.
Thanks, Emily. Wilmac are a trusted voice partner and have been for the last 60 plus years, from dictating machines we used to support and supplied now to kind of modern voice and digital solutions across all verticals, be it contact center, financial trading floor, or public safety. We provide the whole range of services from pre-sales implementation to support and maintenance. And we pride ourselves in being agnostic and working with the best of breed partners, the likes of NICE and Verint in the voice recording world, who we respect as their kind of best in respective fields, but also more importantly, provide the best value to their customers. That's very much how we see Nectar, very much how the industry sees Nectar at the moment, and why we partnered with them to provide their services, which Joe will go into more detail when still as funder, but more specifically, we see a synergy between our two companies, utilizing our own skill sets and IP and voice technology, as well to supplement their own technology with Nectar. Next slide, if you don't mind, Joe. And that's our own IP, which is continuity. So continuity is a unique solution operating in a market where we see increasing complexity, compliance, and modalities in voice. It's a simple technology that can access and connect to a range of both traditional on-premise recording solutions and cloud recording solutions to give an holistic view across all of these platforms, a single pane of glass to replay, not just now to replay, but also providing access and flexibilities in ways in which you can store, utilize, and provide greater value on your data that you're capturing today, which is increasing by the day. It's this unique vendor agnostic quality and flexibility that we feel adds weight and provides that synergy with Nectar's solution, which I'll now hand over to Joe to give you a glance at Nectar as well.
Thank you, Garry. So Nectar, as an organization, we're not quite as old as Wilmac. So we've been, the company was actually launched in 2006. We shipped our first product in 2008. And we started actually in the Avaya marketplace, where we were probably one of the first companies to show a visual representation of a call and the quality of it over time as we started, as the voice over IP converged world kicked into high gear, and customers were migrating from digital to IP and starting to understand that a converged network had a whole new set of challenges to monitor and diagnose and to operationally support. So we started with some demanding call center customers in the Avaya space and have grown from there to today, 14, 15 years later, supporting most major unified communications platforms on premise and cloud, Cisco, Avaya, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, Genesys, Trader Voice, IPC, session border controllers, call recording platforms. Is a very large list of infrastructure and applications, and we're hyper focused on today as we've evolved the digital experience, about how an employee experience, customer experience, and agent experience around how all these voice and communications technologies delivering services to those individual users. And there's a lot of information, and digital experience is really the ultimate manifestation today of monitoring and diagnosing. And it's really ultimately saying, is my customer able to communicate? Is my employee able to properly do their job and communicate? And what are all the technologies that have to work in order to give a proper experience, from a proper headset to a computer to a device to quality to network and so on. And there's lots of different both applications and variables in an ecosystem. And you could see a very small sampling of our customers. Nectar has over 500 customers. Today, some of the largest enterprises on the planet use our software. And the customers, like, for example, in financial services, a customer like Deutsche Bank, where they've been a customer for over 10 years, and we monitor hundreds of thousands of users and devices across their ecosystems of various other technologies, video technologies, cloud services, call recording, Trader Voice, and in one application suite. And so when we look at digital experience, we kind of break it into in the platform itself. There's kind of 6 core areas of modules that provide the services, and at a high level, we look at, starting from the upper right, Foundation is our oldest product, which is that reporting and excuse me, this guy up here is our ability to monitor premise devices, applications, call center modules, systems, your IPC Unity platforms themselves, your Avaya platforms, your Cisco communication managers, and all the infrastructure. And so what we've developed there is a smart auto discovery module that knows how to actually learn the components and the programming of the various modules that of systems we're monitoring, and then auto discover both the infrastructure, the programming, the users, and then auto configure the monitoring. And that's a continuous process, because as most of you folks know, we run these systems, they're always changing and adapting. And one of the challenges for traditional monitoring is, how do I align the monitoring tool to the infrastructure, because it's always under a state of change with the application. So having a self-discovery and auto discovery greatly reduces the cost, time to deployment, and keeps the operating model in better alignment. We have a SIP session diagnostics module, which really gets you into the weeds, looking at signaling and media at things like session border controllers, or edge of the network, or perhaps when you have say in a Cisco world, an expressway, where you're trying to say, what's audio and video look like at a point as it, say, crosses a firewall from the public network to the internal network, or a session border controller where you have a carrier interfacing with, say, your SBCs, and then from there it goes to your application. So diagnostics allows us to analyze all that signaling and media, and create key performance indicators, early detection of signaling problems, and allows you to trace, say, a customer journey from when it starts at the session border controller, say in a voice call, all the way to the agent's desktop in a contact center, and everything in between. We have a testing suite under CX Assurance that allows us to do testing, both load and scale, as well as active monitoring. So we can simulate transactions. So that's where you start to actually create, you know, as an example, you might call into your, if it's a trader voice environment, we might place a call in that's supposed to be recorded and make sure it's actually recorded. Or in a contact center, we can place a call in, make sure you hear the right greeting and menu, interact as if a user would with that system, and then ultimately make sure the call gets to an agent or a synthetic agent. We have our endpoint client for monitoring all the quality in sessions, real-time quality. One of the big things in this endpoint client is providing the last mile troubleshooting. So as in the reality of the hybrid workforce post-COVID, which we'll talk about more today, the ability to actually have a lightweight piece of software that monitors from the user's device, particularly in their home worker, from there to the cloud or to the network, and looking at how much bandwidth that they have, what's their network connectivity, what's their computer performance, memory, some basic compute monitoring, and really understanding how well is the internet working. And then most importantly, because there's other products that do that in the market, but taking that information and tightly connecting it with that user's Teams call, Zoom's call, Avaya call, Cisco call, whatever platform applications they're using, then correlating, is the network affecting their performance? So if they have a poor meeting or poor digital experience, is it because their network's overloaded, there's something going on in their home, their Wi-Fi is not working properly? And that's for our customers today in this reality of how do you support thousands or potentially hundreds of thousands of networks for users that are now working successfully from anywhere they would like to, and that's a new mode of operation. So that's very timely for us, and customers are enjoying that. So with that, I will get my mouse back, which for some reason disappeared here. And so this last screen here is where we start to look at kind of the platform and bringing it all together. So when you look on the left side here, we talk about premise systems. Sometimes people use the word legacy, and we don't say it's legacy, it's premise. So you have a lot of premise infrastructure that needs to be monitored and inventoried and as part of an overall experience of an application. So you look at things like Cisco, Avaya, again, Oracle, Ribbon examples here, call recorders, whatever is on your premise that's providing application services. So those are being fed in, and then you see in the lower bottom here, we have cloud services. So you have cloud applications. So in one platform, we're able to take communications from both premise systems as well as native cloud applications and bring them together into the cloud, into the Nectar DXP cloud, which is that middle diagram. And then we'll talk a little bit about what we've done with Wilmac here with continuity, where call recording becomes, validation becomes really important, saying, do we want to reconcile calls that were made versus calls that were recorded, as an example, because Nectar is capturing all the calls of record. So if you think about, how do I know a call took place? Well, the Cisco, the Avaya, the IPC, the Teams, the Zoom, and so forth, there's records we're collecting that the user actually made that we have all the call records. And so continuity is able to look at the recordings of those and have records of what was recorded, and they can support a various multitude of platforms. You bring those two together, and now you have the ability to say, I have calls that were made. Do I have calls that were recorded? Did they line up? Can we reconcile those? And that is something that is at the joint partnership, which we'll talk more about, is bringing to the customer base. So it's one system. And then as far as outputs and inputs, and we'll look at it live, we have a series of APIs, interfaces, reports that allow users to come in, both end users, IT administrators. And one of the things that we'll see when we actually look at some screens live is that it's very user-friendly. This allows level 1 individuals, help desk people, or even end users to come in and get a basic understanding of what's going on. It's not just an engineering tool. So maybe, Will, you want to talk a little bit about this here? Excuse me, Garry. Wilmac.
Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think it's a fair point to say that access to the call recording system typically has always been a siloed system outside of perhaps the rest of the architecture from a testing perspective, and marrying those two up, because they're all so many different databases. Obviously, marrying all those databases up and getting one version of the truth is a difficult thing to do. And I think, you know, the main point I always get from Nectar is flexibility, vendor agnostic approach. You can connect to multiple platforms. It doesn't matter which platforms we're connecting to. We can connect it to give it that kind of holistic view. And it's the same with Wilmac. I think there's lots of synergy there in terms of we're agnostic of what recording or capture platform you capture to. The point being is whatever technology or operational decisions you make as a business, we have the abilities to connect those plethora of different technologies, and there is a vast range out there today. And there's a vast range of different modalities, increasing at every opportunity it can. But we have the technology to connect all those different systems and give you that holistic view. Nectar giving you a holistic view across all those different technologies, and Wilmac assisting and giving you that holistic view across all those different recording technologies and matching those up. Joe, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that at all. Or...
No, I just think that, you know, one of the key things is that collecting information it can be on the easier side of things. You know, there's a lot of interfaces to go out and collect information, where making it useful, making it insightful, having it drive business outcomes, having it tell a story, depending on the use cases and who the user persona is that's accessing needs this information. That's critical. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of data, and it's not informative.
Right. Great. Well, thank you, Garry and Joe, for giving us those overviews. It's obvious that Nectar, DXP, and Continuity Replay offer benefits separately, but they really complement each other when we partner together. So now that you have some context surrounding the solutions and the organizations, I think this is a good point to transition into our discussion questions that we have prepared for you. So how we'll do this is I'll read out the questions, and then I'll hand it over to Garry to get the discussion started, and then there will be a bit of a back and forth. So we'll move into discussion point 1 then. So the first discussion point is, how do I manage my operations with a COVID hybrid workforce?
Yeah, the dreaded C word. I suppose there's no getting away from it. COVID has impacted all our businesses and the way we operate. From an operational standpoint, this has put pressures on our customers. It's put pressures on the way we operate with our customers, way we operate internally to ourselves, to transition and change operating models to cater for this and how we work. And naturally, that architecture that provides the services employees need while still maintaining the delays that customers expect. You know, Joe talked about with home working particularly, you're now not dealing with one particular network across your business. You could be dealing with millions or thousands of different networks. So it's very difficult to manage that appropriately and understand in that chain that everyone's getting consistent quality and the SLAs are being kept. Also, it's also maintaining kind of a global holistic view on all of those endpoints. All of those endpoints are vastly different, and they'll be different for each organization wherever you are in your transitional journey around, because naturally every company is changing for COVID. That's had to put pressures on technology. So, and we're seeing that on the Wilmac side. We're seeing a lot of people transition to cloud contact center, for example, and a lot more collaborative tools. The modalities are increasing of how they interact with customers. So the amount of endpoints and the differentiation in endpoints is increasing. So it's having this kind of global holistic view that Joe's shown you now. Is something that is very rare for customers to have. Do you want to know what your thoughts are on that?
Absolutely. So in one of the trends we see still, and I think one of the fortunate thing of having in my job, I get to talk to lots of our enterprise customers around the globe and hear what their insights are, where they're going, how they're going to be operating. And so there's definitely a return to office underway, but that return to office, as I think we've talked, is what we hear from most is hybrid, certain days of the week. Certain there'll be some people who'll be back in the office full time, and there's a lot of people who may never go back to the office again, or just go in very periodically. I was at a dinner with a bunch of my friends two nights ago, talking about this topic, about how, what days they're going to go, and everyone agreed, well, maybe Tuesday and Thursday, we'll have Mondays and Friday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday home. But it's interesting. And so when you look at that and say, okay, this is here to stay, how do I operationally support this? How do I drive cost out of the model? How do I make sure that people can work and be productive? Being able to look at, well, who's in the office working? So these are office locations under the corporate tab, and the green indicates good sessions, red, of course, is poor. You can click on that and get a list of networks. You could zoom in on a map and actually click, and if you wanted to see, these represent employee or customer experiences and where they are in the world. And the external tab allows us to look at that same view, but these are now external. Where's the user in the world, and what dot? And so if you click on a dot, for example, it's saying, hey, this is the country they're in, this is the city. Even now, and you can see in Ukraine, there's people out who for this customer who are working out in Kharkiv, or where they are and who the ISP is and what the overall quality was. You can click on this and actually drive into that session if you want to see that individual item, where they were. And then from a user level, one of the key things is, how do I understand users and performance? We have a users tab on the product, and so here's my personal dashboard of some people I was interested in. I pinned them to the page, and I could search for anyone on the page. So like if I wanted to search on Jennifer's on the web meeting today, I could search for Jennifer, and I could use Jennifer Rossdale, and I could pin her to my dashboard or click on her name. And if we look at individuals, we can see this health index here. Where are they last located, sessions, percentages, and the health index is an opportunity to understand. Let's pick on Mr. Reith, for example. How healthy are they as an individual user? Let's reset filters here, make sure we have all his information, look at the last day. We can dissect by platforms. We can see Mark has Cisco, Microsoft. He was a former Skype user. He's provisioned on Zoom. And he also has something called the Nectar endpoint client. The endpoint client allows us to monitor. So his digital experience. He's a very healthy user at 93. We could alert a trend on that can drive IT. If Mark drops below a number that the organization wants a warning, or that's not healthy, he can get an email, he can get a text message about that his internet is potentially causing him issues, or what his quality ratings. We can see here a list of sessions he was in. We can actually go in here and see who the meeting organizer was. For example, he was in a Teams meeting where there was he wasn't we know from his chart he wasn't the issue, but say here's the organizer. It was hosted in Ashburn, Virginia. We can see that Oliver Moore was someone who had poor audio quality in the meeting. The other ones were green. We could easily click on Oliver's sessions and see that he had some issues, and he also is using an unsupported headset. That's why it's yellow here, saying he's using a built-in microphone and speaker. He doesn't actually have a proper headset, which is being flagged as a potential, and it's telling up here. It's making it very easy to explain to a novice person that, hey, Oliver's not using a microphone that's supported. He's not using a speaker that's supported. His network caused some quality issues. We also can see that he's in London, who his fiber internet provider is. And if you wanted to understand Oliver more, maybe he's having problems, we could simply click on Oliver, and actually the system will take you right into Oliver, and then kind of talk about his sessions. He only had one poor call, which was good. It was that one he happened to be on, so it's easy to see that while he had 7, he was in 7 sessions, only 1 were poor. So that happened to be the one. So he's not having a systemic issue. And if you want to look at him over a longer period of time, we can say, well, how does it look over 7 days? Well, he's only 1 poor in 7 days. So happened to be that one call, right? It wasn't a systemic problem. You could also see what kind of clients he uses, what kind of devices is he using, and is he using, what modalities does he use? So there's a lot of ways in which it's very easy for a user to interact and understand what's going on. And the last thing I want to touch on quickly is going back to Mr. Reith, is we also have something called the endpoint client running, we mentioned. So the endpoint client is monitoring every X number of minutes, XB, determining about how is Mark's connection to the internet. So the endpoint client, if we look at the advanced screen here, we could see things like from Mark's home over to, in this case, it was, he ran to Azure West. He had 7.5 megabits up and 15 megabits down from his home network, and his delay and round trip line. So he has a reasonable amount of bandwidth. And so we're checking and monitoring his network connection. And this happens on, if I go back a screen here, we're monitoring Mark You'll notice every 15 minutes, a series of tests kick off where we look at how is his bandwidth to various cloud providers. And because it's a demo system and we kind of trying to show we do more testing than you would normally do, you can see he's using Comcast cable. He's in Monterey, California. He's a lucky boy and lucky man, I should say. And you can see here his every 15 minutes, we're checking how is his internet connectivity and bandwidth to various places around the world to give an overall sense. And he's doing quite well. And this affects his health index. So if there was a problem in his home network, it would cause his health index to degrade. We would understand how does that affecting his teams or his other meetings. Again, driving that home worker scenario in that COVID world.
Gotcha. The dreaded C word. I like that. I'm going to start referring to it as that, but it's significantly impacted the functionality of the platforms that you utilize in your organization. Customer demands have changed, so that means you have to change. So being adaptable and flexible means putting a lot of thought and consideration into the different technologies available to you. But before I move into our second discussion question, I want to bring up a quick poll for our audience. So the question is, how many platforms do you need to support in your organization? So let me launch that poll really quick. So that is now open for our audience. I'll give you guys about 30 seconds to answer. This can include trader voice, contact center, legacy voice, et cetera, et cetera. This is always the time I feel like I need to create a soundtrack to have on hand. Maybe some Jeopardy music, maybe something like that. I don't know, but and I don't think you guys want to hear me sing or hum. So I'll give a little bit more time.
Yeah, we had a webinar a couple of weeks ago with a different group of customers, and we asked this question. It was quite interesting to see the range. Almost no one put one. We had more fives than I thought we would get, frankly, and a lot of three being one of the highest answer of customers with systems. And the larger the enterprise, of course, the more they have. But it's will be interesting to see if we get some responses on this.
It is interesting. I'll leave it open just for a few more seconds, and then we'll move into our second discussion point. So I will now close that, and we will see who voted. So we had 100% choose 3. Like you said, Joe, that aligns well with what you said. Very cool.
Yeah. It's
okay.
It's not uncommon to have a voice platform, a contact center platform, and then now a cloud collaboration platform.
Right. All right. So that moves us well into discussion point 2 then. How do you effectively manage disparate systems?
Yeah, and that is interesting because we were literally talking about that yesterday, weren't we, Joe? I think it was, or the day before. That 3 or 5 was kind of the average now, and I think we're seeing that across all verticals as well, because even in just the contact center, there's normally either geographical or maybe M&A pressures or different lines of business, for example, that are using different systems. Not even just using different systems, perhaps there's different silos within that group that support them, and they operate within different internal groups, for example. They operate under different processes, different rule sets of how they can engage and how they're regulated, for example, as well. So there's a whole range of reasons why we're seeing different or disparate systems. And also, I think it's interesting for what you were showing, Joe, that I think now it doesn't necessarily mean internal systems as well. Because of home working, you're almost having to support or navigate and manage thousands of disparate systems, right? I know you're making the joke about the headset, and I don't have a headset, so I apologize for the audio, but that's 3 times I've caught you, Joe, on that one now. But that's right. These are the types of things that you have to manage. You now have all these different things to manage and make sure that the quality and service that you provide is consistent across the board. And again, this idea of a holistic, centralized view that cuts across all of those disparate systems and is not leaving one out is very, very important. Certainly what we get from feedback from customers is very important. Joe, I know you agree on that one, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we see is common that customers are looking for is the single pane of glass. They want one place to see. And while it's often that's achievable with we see it in application infrastructure and with say all the Linux and Windows and various business IT applications. Voice and video communications platforms are unique in the type of monitoring they require, the type of tooling they require, and so it's very common. Most of our customers have a void there prior to becoming a customer of Nectar, or they had very limited insight where they couldn't have, say, an example, have all their whether it's from a platform perspective, in this case, an Avaya, in this environment when it has Avaya communication manager support, and a Cisco support, Cisco video, Cisco meeting server, Skype, Teams, Zoom as an example here, and Cisco video endpoints for a room system. So just in this one environment, there's over 7 different platforms feeding information into a cohesive view that is unified into one set of tools, right? But then you can do reporting and you can benchmark different moments and the ability to drill in. So if I go into, for example, a Cisco environment, we can easily understand call managers, health, registrations, a lot of errors, things that are offline, trunking issues, errors. You can click into a device and go deeper into it, or down to memory, and so there's some lower level stuff, but of course all integrated in, and then you can see these devices in call flows. So it sounds simple, but having real visibility at both the user level, the application, the network level, and then tying it into making it actionable. What do you do with that information? Like, can you, for example, create an alert where if there's a percentage of poor calls or by location or by user, sending an alert. If your executive, if your CEO is having a problem or executive row is having issues, are you proactive? Do you know what's happening? Does it matter what platform they're on? Do you have a single view of that user and being able to say, hey, my CEO had an issue. If he has, if at a user level, our CEO is David Gingano, I can make a rule for David, type his name, hit a plus and say, hey, if David has 1% issue out of 1, if he's one bad call out of 1, I want to know about it because he's the CEO, and I want to know about him having a problem, and I want to create a ticket in ServiceNow, or perhaps I want to alert someone about it. So, that kind of granularity about actually truly being proactive and understand, and then being able to go into where and why. Okay, he had an issue. Was he home? Where was he working from? Why was it happening? What platform was he on? Because you oftentimes wind up asking users lots and lots of questions before someone even begin to understand what's going on. And having all that information at your fingertips transforms service delivery.
That's interesting. The whole single pane of glass feature is such a refreshing, it's very refreshing to see in both Nectar DXP and Continuity Replay. So being able to manage all of your platforms in one place, it's a huge relief. First of all, it's your operational environment, and it'll help simplify your processes surrounding it. So when it comes to the performance of these systems, it's important to monitor their quality. So that leads us right into discussion point 3, which is how do I monitor quality across all of these platforms consistently?
I suppose the starting point is always, so, Joe, you mentioned a couple of systems there, Avaya, et cetera. Each one of those systems would have their own reporting capabilities, for example, but also, more annoyingly, I suppose, for customers, their own respective take on quality and what that means. And itself, that consistent point of quality, the fact that you can access all these systems holistically means you can measure them all consistently and have the same yardstick to measure them, but also then break it down in the granularity that you just mentioned around, obviously some channels are going to be more important than others. Your CEO's calls, I want to know if one goes wrong with those. So being able to monitor quality across all those platforms consistently is absolutely key, and we see that as a struggle for most customers. And then it's also to be proactive about it. So obviously, Joe, I know you'll talk about Nectar's ability to push calls and create voice channels or voice traffic that goes down these channels, so you can actually have the same measuring point to measure them all. You're not measuring point A to point B when actually you're point C to point D, for example. You're using the same metrics to measure that quality consistently, the same voice call down the same channels, the same process, etc. So it's a big challenge that we see across the board for most customers, and I'm sure you see that too in your customers, Joe, as well.
It is, and it's interesting because if you think about some of the vendors, like let's take cloud service providers as since you know, and you look kind of looking at where the market is moving towards. So if you look at a Zoom dashboard as an example, there's a lot of information Zoom will provide on their dashboard a user can get into, but one of the things they really don't like to do is put red on the screen. You know, neither does Microsoft. It's really, they really don't want to. It's interesting because people have bad experiences, but you know, no one likes to convict themselves and say, well, maybe it may not be them, but it's just not easy to see, right? And one of the concerns I get, and one of the things that customers say is when you have multiple platforms, where do I go for my single source of truth? Can I trust the measurements? Does the fox trust who's running the hen house, right? That whole saying is right. Do I trust the numbers I'm getting? Are they accurate? And then how do I compare those numbers across vendors and platforms? And can I benchmark? If you have a lot of our customers have multiple cloud platforms, multiple systems, can I benchmark my Teams quality versus my Avaya quality? Can I benchmark one versus the other versus my on-prem versus cloud? Whenever you make changes, users tend to blame the new system. It's different, so sometimes there's always a lot of anecdotals, but being able to have actual service delivery metrics, being able to provide, you know, as examples, if we go to a call history page, and you know, we can reset filters here and say, hey, over a certain period of time, you know, what was my overall quality ratings on PSTN and external calls, conference calls, people calling each other, what's the percentages? And there's lots of reports, but simply I can go, well, you know, is there a difference between, you know, how does Zoom compare? How many conferences were in Zoom? What was the poor? 6.8% poor on Zoom conferences. You know, how does that compare to Microsoft? 4%. So there's more poor Zoom conferences. It wasn't orders of magnitude different, but there's clearly, and like in our case, 12,000 Teams meetings versus a small number of Zooms. Teams is the platform that Nectar primarily uses. And then you get into your question of consistency of information. If we look at some differences, because if we look at, say, a Zoom meeting, or we looked at a Teams meeting, or same view that you saw for a Teams meeting, same consistent view. However, when we get inside, say, a session, you may see some differences where, for example, Zoom provides minute by minute information about the quality of the user experience, which is wonderful for both their voice and video, their bit rate. So there's more details available about that. However, if I go to the advanced tab, you'll notice, for example, I'll show a Microsoft, there's less information about the device. It's got Windows, it's got some basic information, some quality summary, but if I was to go look at this and then compare it to, say, let's go get a Teams meeting, just to kind of look at the difference for, let me just get a conference, I apologize. So I want to be fair and can compare exactly the same types. I can say, hey, I'm interested in just conferences. So let's make sure I only get conferences in the list here. So now let's look at a Teams conference, and let's pick a user and go click on them, okay, and he's on Mac. How to be a Mac guy. So it's interesting there. We'll show you a difference between a Mac and Windows. So we got a Windows guy, and then we can go look at, on the Windows platform, Microsoft provides enormous details about what wireless chipset did they use, were they wired, what channel were they on their Wi-Fi signal strength. They'll provide information about the headset, how many decibels of sound. So there's this information's coming from, there's a difference between Microsoft and Zoom. Now there's some common information about quality we can provide, and there's nuances. So one of the things we do is take all these different versions of information and try to create a common presentation. And then if there's gaps, we can fill those gaps with, like, our endpoint client can fill gaps. So one of the things says, well, I want more information about the headset. Well, Zoom doesn't provide it. Well, but I want to know that information. Well, there's another way to get the information. Anyway, so hopefully that was beneficial. And
Awesome. So 2 things, quality and compliance are 2 main points that we want to emphasize throughout this conversation, because it's where Wilmac and Nectar thrive when coming together. So like Garry kind of said before, identifying the area of concern can be nearly impossible with multiple platforms. So consistent quality monitoring across your platforms can be a huge help. So now that we've covered the first point, quality, let's talk about compliance in discussion point 4. How do I maintain compliance across all of these platforms?
I mean, yeah, no one understands the importance of being compliant. I think more than Wilmac, it's something that we lived and breathed. You know, call recording's been our bread and butter in terms of technology that we provide support with our customers for a long time. And call recording naturally is all around making sure people are compliant, and particularly in voice. And we're talking about capturing those conversations, which in itself is usually a siloed system away from the voice platform. Unices and Verents, for example, are kind of the market leaders, but they're normally siloed away from the Avayas or the Ciscos or whatever the CCAS platforms are. There's normally a variety of different connectors, and you're introducing a range of different APIs and connectors into your architecture to manage appropriately. And you know, I was laughing a little bit because the scenario that Joe described about, you know, that one version of the truth, call recording is naturally where I've seen more of the finger pointing. You know, the call recording platform will point to the telephony and say it didn't deliver the call, and the telephony platform will say, well, we did, it didn't record the call. And that's the traditional finger pointing exercise you get, particularly around compliance and ensuring that. And Nectar and Wilmac, I think we can address that piece because we have an ability to connect to the recording systems to kind of give a centralized database for one version of the truth, and then passing that on to Nectar so they can obviously manage the two. And that's where we've kind of come together to help our customers. You know, we can understand the voice environment. It's very niche. It's very siloed, away from the traditional voice elements. But Nectar understands all of the other endpoints and connectivity challenges that customers face, and bringing those together is very, very powerful, particularly as modalities increase. You know, it's not just, you know, we talked about the disparate systems. It's not just one or two systems, front office, back office, that you're recording anymore. There's mobile, there's Teams, there's other systems, and that list will only ever increase from what we've seen from regulatory pressures. So it's very important to maintain compliance across these platforms. It's even harder to make sure that you are, and knowing that you are 100% each day, and that's why Nectar and Wilmac can help you achieve that. Joe, your thoughts?
Yeah, we monitor a lot of call recorders in our customer base, and it's interesting the difference between monitoring and what people call assurance of compliance, right? So, you know, how do you know, and we'll talk more about this in the next couple, how do you know you're recording all the right people? How do you know that that's actually working? And then what happens when you have cloud applications and maybe a cloud recorder, premise recorder, as you said, and how do you really, it's a daunting challenge. And then the financial services sector, which obviously is a major part of your market focus, there's fines. MiFID II in Europe, right? There's compliance, you got Dodd-Frank, you have, I know that it's something that most customers still struggle with today, and it's not. And part of the problem is that it's not an easy problem to solve, because there's not like there's this universal serial number of a call that came in that magically gets attached, and when it gets recorded, it just, all the serial numbers kept along its journey. So it's a challenge, and so that our approach to this has been to be able to go back. And so if we look at like a slide, maybe it's a good time to look at our slide we had earlier about, you have all these various different platforms that you're supporting, and you have your different call recorders that you're interfacing with. Having a single place where all the information can be pulled in about the devices, the call records, and then a product like Continuity that can look inside those, it really starts to pull together all this information, which is why the partnership here, specifically in this area, is very special. When you think about, Nectar has every call record for every type of transaction that's taken place in my communications network, both for contact center, trader voice, and regular communications, knowledge workers, and so forth, if they're back office people. If they were recorded, Continuity knows they were recorded. You can, and then the two together start to look at if there's a real need for compliance or monitoring. You can now have that ability to look across this large environment. You know, and
Yeah.
then an example, and I think an example that we wanted to touch on, I apologize, is what does it look like in the cloud? So the black on here is redaction. It's my crude way of this was taken from a customer, so I redacted it for the demo today. And so this is a Teams conference which is recorded, and you'll see actually, as you saw participants, the compliance recorder actually shows up as a participant in the call, and the APIs that we interface with, in this case Teams, provides enough information for us to actually show the compliance recorder being engaged, and when it got brought into the call, and then the quality of the actual call of the compliance that was taking place. So it's and if you actually click on the compliance user, it would take you to just like they had a user homepage, it takes you to the compliance users, the compliance recordings homepage with 100% health index saying it recorded 161 sessions. You know, some quality metrics, some are unknown, which means it might have been for some other type of session where there wasn't a quality metric generated. And then you could see actually the meeting and organizer of who that recorder was engaged in, and over a time frame that was selected. So this, and then even a further drill down into, if I looked at a session, you know, okay, the recorder or the Microsoft data center that the conference was housed in, some information about the recorders, it was a Microsoft hyper, blah, 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 some version information and some quality metrics and how long it was engaged for, you know. So pretty interesting, you know, information available even when you go to cloud.
Right. Yeah, and like you said, Joe, especially in that financial services space, you can really see the importance of recording assurance and the effects it can have when you realize, oh, a few weeks later, you're missing recordings. So being proactive is so critical to maintaining the credibility of your organization and sidestepping those fines and penalties that come along when there is non-compliance. And so that brings us right into our discussion point 5, which reads, customers are often blind to issues until a recording is not found. Is there any way to be proactive? And Gary, I will hand it to you.
Yeah, I think we're showing ways that you can be proactive. You know, I think it's not just recording as well. It's you don't know what you don't know, and there is so much connectivity and differences in your organizations now, and you know, variance in your architecture that, you know, you need that level of visibility now to make sure that you're managing it appropriately and staying ahead of it, because naturally, and if you're not proactive, that's where support issues come from, that's where delays come from, and it's too late. There's already been an impact, whether that's fines for non-compliance in financial services, whether that's lack of customer service or the ability not to service your customers, so loss of revenue, extra disputes that result from that compliance issue and disputes that come from those, not to mention just impact on your employees. You know, we talk about, was it the great resignation since COVID? We've had employees move from contact centers because their platforms aren't able to support them from home working or some sort of hybrid and provide that level of service. So I think it's not just recordings, even though recording obviously is a very specific topic for us today. But I think just being proactive in general across all your platforms is a good practice to take. And what you've seen today, I think, from Nectar is that obviously it touches on so many points of your architecture, not just the recording. The recording is a piece that's very special to us, and I think is very powerful for customers to add to that, but it's across the whole piece. I think it's important to be proactive. So that's what I would kind of take away from that point. And also it's what kind of certainly what customers are feeding back to me in terms of there's always ways that they want to stay ahead of things as opposed to find out things and stay behind. So it's a lot easier for people to manage. Joe?
Yeah, it is such an interesting topic and something that over the last 10, 15 years, I would say it's something I learned quite a bit about. This wasn't something that I thought would be on my resume about knowing a whole lot about compliance recording and the nuances. And things about, like, in a trader voice environment where there is no call setup. So, you know, there's a button, you hit a hoot, right? You hit a button, you chat. So the recorders are always essentially recording silence and then discarding it. So when you go look at the records, it's kind of interesting because you got a lot of segments of calls because of that. And so trader voice creates extremely very specific challenges and problems. But even if you look at just general contact center, you know, if you look at a buyer environment, for example, there's something called DMCC. It's how a call recorder is engaged. So, you know, when the PBX is sending information on a feed, well, how does the call recorder know what to do? Well, there's another box called an AES server that's in the middle. That thing's got a connection to the communication manager. It's got another connection to the recorder. There's all sorts of information moving back and forth. If those things aren't talking, you're in big trouble, right? So how do you monitor those just to make sure they're up and running? And that's kind of on the easy side. That's not too difficult. I mean, you have to know what to monitor, but it's doable. And then that information gets to the recorder. The recorder then someone has to tell the calls they want to record, right? If someone doesn't mark someone designated them to be recording, they don't get recorded. Is that a problem in the recorder? All right. Is it a process issue? We always laugh. Garry, who's the golden source of call recorded users?
I've been in too many arguments between recording vendors and telephony vendors or support partners to comment on that possibly. But yeah, you're right, absolutely. I mean, DMCC is a great example because there's always one step. There's so many steps involved in that recording process for one call. And there are so many steps that are on so many people's responsibilities. It's impossible to make sure that all of those are done correctly. And also, more importantly, if a support query came in on that, that's all of the steps that they would follow. So you're still, you know, an engineer with log on and go through all of those steps. This is right. This is right. That's 2 weeks to find the actual where the problem was potentially. So, you know, that's 2 weeks you save back straight away by, well, even getting ahead of the problem. You might not even need those 2 weeks with something like Nectar. So.
Yeah, there's when you take that problem, and the way we like to look at it is if you think about if a call wasn't recorded, and using this example, that's a crime. Who are the suspects? And so to understand the suspects, you need to know every device and everything that's involved. So to properly monitor, taking that example, you also need to understand, well, then you have all this stuff, then the AES server in the Avaya world makes a registered station. It has to be an actual virtual extension that gets single-step conference to get recorded into the call. If the extension is not registered in the system, it's not getting recorded. So if I was to bring up a dependency tree, and we won't do this now for time's sake, we call it dependent relationships. To record a call, these are all the things that you're dependent on. You have to have this box, that service, this link up, this register station, this service has to be running. There's all these things you monitor, and that's kind of, I hate to say that's table stakes, that's the baseline. That just assumes, and then from there, is it quality? Is it audible? You know, did it get recorded, but it was unaudible? Why is it unaudible? Was it because, was there a problem in the network? Was the recorder busy? Was there a problem? So there's a lot of stuff to do, which I think most customers, a lot of them are negligent on, or just don't have the wherewithal, maybe not negligent is the right word, to get all the pieces defined. And then from there is, okay, now I think I got my basis covered. Did I record all the right people? Did I record all the calls I was supposed to? Were they audible? Was there quality? Did it make its way to archive? Forget about the near term versus long term, right? I got to hold it for 18 months. How do you know that process is working properly? So it does mushroom when you really break down that process and the longevity of it, and which is why when you look at our joint tooling, we have an option to do a synthetic call, right? So there's a walk the floor in the trader world, okay, the voice row. Let's pick up an IPC turret, for example. Let's have it make a phone call. Let's have it call the Nectar cloud. Let's answer that call. Let's play an audio file in. Let's make sure that gets recorded. We'll have continuity, pull the recording back. Nectar will take the recording back and we'll compare it to the original file and say, does it sound good? Because we know what the order, and then we can say, check. We know it was recorded, it passed a check, it was audible, and you can have that on an automation and every day know with confidence. And if God forbid something happened, you can go to a regulator and say, hey, we do these things. I mean, how much more can I possibly do? We're automating all these things.
Well, more importantly, you say we have problems on these lines or these devices, do not use these, or you can go straight to the source of the problem and resolve that. And more importantly, you mentioned like all the archive rules, have you mentioned all the archive rules and all of those kinds of things. So it's very varied, yeah. Sorry.
Wow, those are some great points to end our discussion segment. And now we'll go quickly into our Q&A section so I can give you a few minutes back of your hour. So if you have any questions for Garry or Joe, we'll answer those now, and feel free to put them in the chat or question windows on the right hand of your screen. It's just a reminder, if we don't get to your question right now, we'll make sure to follow up individually with you. And if you have questions that might pop up after the webinar that you might wake up in the middle of the night tonight and think about, like I do sometimes, please don't hesitate to reach out to me so we can get you the answer. So let me check right now. I think we have time for one question. And here is one. So I have a mix of premise and cloud systems, multiple recording vendors. Will you be able to support an environment like that?
Yeah, it's a short answer, but we support environments like that today. I think if you've seen anything from today, you've seen Nectar's ability to connect to multiple voice platforms, multiple modalities. You've seen that in the demonstrations that Joe was running on the platform. I can also tell you from Wilmac's experience that we have the ability to connect to all the multiple voice platforms, be they cloud or on-premise. So I think I mentioned it right at the start, the key point for both customers, or both companies, should I say, and the reason why we think this partnership is so good is because of our vendor agnostic approach and being able to connect all these different vendors. So absolutely, a hybrid environment, cloud and on-prem, we can 100% support that.
Joe, do you have anything to add?
Just echo everything Garry said, and lots of real world customers, real experiences, both the multitude of platforms, and then it's very common to see a set of recorders on the contact center side that might be different than the trader voice side or on the back office side. And then cloud gets involved, and sometimes depending on who's having the responsibility for the cloud, and maybe another product in there. So it's unfortunately for larger organizations, it's not uncommon to have multiple platforms on both the recording side as well as the communications contact center side, which makes that single pane of glass even more desirable if it's actually provides the right insights and information.
Yeah, and I think you touched on a great point as well. We talked about this transitional phase from on-premise. I mean, I'm assuming the customer who asked that is probably thinking, you know, I have an on-premise environment, but I am transitioning to a cloud environment. Most customers do have a cloud transitional strategy, particularly around voice. Nectar becomes even more powerful for kind of ad hoc project and transitional testing in that sense, because you'll add additional layers to push that audio down to make sure that when you go through these big transitional projects, these big digital transformation projects, that you're ultimately signing off on it 100%, that you're absolutely happy with the quality and what's happening on that network. So that's also vitally important, because I'm sure we've all been involved in projects where something's going to go live by Monday, but it's not working on Saturday. That's a problem. And something like Nectar and continuity there is also particularly powerful. So just want to put that in.
Awesome. All right, what a great answer to wrap up our webinar today. So I'll transition to our conclusion. So thank you all for joining us and participating during Wilmac and Nectar coming together to provide a future-proof digital experience platform. We hope you learned about how Wilmac and Nectar work together to support customers like you, and that it is possible to future-proof your operations and improve your customer, agent, and user experiences. So my contact information and a contact from Nectar, Jen Rosdale, can be found on the screen. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or are interested in learning more about what Wilmac and Nectar have to offer. The recording of this webinar will also be available to you soon after we're done and posted on our organization's LinkedIn pages. So feel free to check it out and share if you would like. So thank you again for your time. Have a great rest of your day and finish off Hump Day strong. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Take care, guys.
Cheers, guys.